Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we're going to take a look once again at the shifting realities of US-India relations. And social media talks of a diplomatic rift. And in that context, we analyse India's massive naval build-up in the Indian Ocean. And we'll take a close look at the deep economic fractures threatening the state's unity and what that means potentially for the Khalistan movement. Then, after the anniversary of India's murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, we expose the deep, immense irony of India's foreign consulates launching charm offensive on the anniversary of his killing, even in Canada itself. And we'll highlight the contrast between India's bullying tactics with how the interfaith grassroots across the United States are actually now uniting against it. And finally, we travel to New Zealand to break down the lazy weaponisation of the word extremist, before we then analyse the latest calling out from an Indian politician of the deliberate engineered structural collapse of the state of Punjab, where of course the fight for sovereignty has become really more, it's evolved from a political debate more into an absolute necessity for survival. So lots to get into today's show. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of great comments which have been filling up beneath the video. So thank you for those. So do stay tuned for that. But as I say, lots to get through this morning, as always, in our, once again, a packed show. And a subject that we have talked periodically about. This, of course, is the important relationship between the United States and India. And you might have, if you spent time scrolling through international relations forums in recent weeks, or even some of the diplomatic channels over the last few weeks, you might have noticed there's a very distinct, and I have to say rather loud narrative that's starting to pick up the pace and actually gaining a bit of traction. The headline is that Washington is quietly, strategically, apparently sidelining New Delhi. In other words, is the US starting to sort of say, you know what, we don't really want to ally or even need to ally with India? Well, on the surface, you can start to see why some analysts are biting on this hook, this sort of idea of this, because we've seen many high-level warnings from former US officials, including somebody like John Bolton as a prime example, openly criticising the current administration's flirtation with a US-China G2 framework as opposed to the G7, just the G2, consisting of the United States and China. It's a model, basically, that positions Washington and Beijing as the two suns in this sort of global solar system. In other words, we are the only superpowers worth talking about on Earth. So they are trying to create this framework of the G2. Now, to critics, this approach, you can almost call it a transactional approach. In other words, it's what do we both get out of this? This transactional approach to global foreign policy, and it's heavily bogged down, of course, by tariff disputes and trade bickering, and all these sort of little irritating details. It risks pushing India to the periphery of the global stage, of the global conversation, really at the exact moment that closer cooperation is actually needed. And combine that with Washington's persistent frustration over India's rigid adherence to its historic strategic autonomy. That's its policy of, well, we'll pick and choose what suits our interests. It doesn't matter who, whether it's with Russia, China, or with the United States, we'll just pick and choose on issues, sides on issues that benefit India and nobody else. That's it, the strategic autonomy. And especially, of course, with that in that context, is ongoing economic and energy ties with Moscow, which, of course, is deeply irritating the West. The narrative of this widening rift between India and the United States is actually starting to look quite plausible. People are starting to think, actually, you know what? Yeah, I think there is something in this. Even I've talked about it in the past, thinking, actually, there may well be something in this. So, is the United States really cutting India out of the equation? Or are we just looking at a natural friction-filled bumps in a highly complex road that we're travelling between the two countries? Well, to find the real answer, we've got to look past the diplomatic posturing, the diplomatic language, the op-eds, the editorials, the analysts, etc., who were all caught up with all the distractions and clickbait and trying to engage sort of the audience's attention with all sorts of increasingly scary headlines or provocative headlines. Ultimately, we've got to look at the cold, hard realities of what's going on the ground. And the realities are actually playing out right now in the Indian Ocean as a prime example. The UK's Daily Telegraph, the Telegraph reported on this yesterday it was, and I picked up this piece, and it speaks volumes really about a lot of the realities going on the ground. The Global Defence correspondent captured a huge milestone that tells a very different story about particularly India and its relationships with the West. In a single day, the Syama Prasad Mukherjee port in Kolkata, Prime Minister Modi officially commissioned 3 advanced, indigenously built naval platforms into the Indian Navy. And it was a tri-commissioning of 3 very important ships into the Indian Navy that came from a single domestic shipbuilder, designed, built in India. This is pretty unprecedented. And the specific capabilities of these vessels reveal exactly what Delhi is preparing for. It speaks volumes. So I just want to look at what happened. These 3 vessels. You've got to start with the INS, the Indian naval ship Dunagir. She is a stealth guided missile frigate equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance, armed to the teeth with BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles. It is an Indian blue water warrior designed for long-range combat. This is an extraordinarily powerful and indigenously built warship. Then we've got the INS Sanjhodak, if I pronounce that correctly. Now, interestingly, she's a large hydrographic survey vessel. And her job, to map the ocean floor, monitor underwater topography, and to deploy ROVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs. Essentially, it's an eye beneath the sea. I've got a particular interest in this because my background, I used to be a hydrographic surveyor. I used to work on vessels like this, non-military ones, but I've worked on vessels like this. Yeah, we literally surveyed the ocean floor, cables, all sorts of interesting strategic things. Underwater ordnance is another example. And then finally, you've got the INS, the Agray. Now, she's a highly specialised anti-submarine hunter. Shallow water craft designed to basically, obviously, hunt down and neutralise enemy submarines hiding near the coast. So again, an extraordinarily important strategic vessel designed for a very important purpose. So why does a single day triple commissioning, induction, whatever you want to call it, matter to somebody like us, or anybody, frankly, tracking US-India relations? Well, because these ships were built with one clear, unambiguous purpose: to counter the rapid, aggressive expansion of China, the Chinese People's Liberation Army and Navy, right in India's backyard. And again, this is something we have talked about a lot in the past. The Indian Ocean is not just, these days, it's not just a quiet maritime highway or even a sort of an oceanic backwater. It's an actively contested battleground. It's a peaceful battleground, but it is part of this sort of, I suppose it's like a reflection of the Cold War with Russia, but this is now the Cold War, the maritime war that's going on with China. Beijing has been aggressively weaving what it's called its string of pearls logistics network around the subcontinent. Again, I've talked a lot about this, how China very deliberately has been building this string of pearls, essentially. It's a string of pearls because it is these nodes, these pearls all linked around the Indian Ocean of logistics supply bases. It is essentially weaving this logistics network around India, building dual-use naval facilities all the way from Hambantota to Sri Lanka, in Sri Lanka to Bangladesh, Myanmar, essentially encircling India with these dual-purpose bases. In other words, they're dressed up as freight bases, commerce bases, ports. In reality, in the blink of an eye, they can be converted into naval shipyards, supply bases, logistics bases for the Chinese Navy. Just this month, Pakistan took delivery of its first Chinese-built Hangul-class submarine. And that submarine is equipped with air-independent propulsion, a huge technological advanced system, aiming to deploy it directly into the Bay of Bengal for the first time since 1971, launching a submarine. And this is where this sort of sidelining narrative just totally falls apart when you look at, say, the hard realities of what's going on the ground. Washington knows it cannot police the Indo-Pacific region all by itself. It needs a massive capable regional heavyweight to act as this counterweight to Beijing's maritime ambitions. India, of course, is the only power in the region capable of doing that role, of fulfilling that role. So, and of course, the United States recognises this, and the political commentators are, squabbling over the details of trade tariffs. Even I get caught up in, the relationship's souring, it's falling apart. But in reality, as I say, strategically, at a very high level, this relationship is actually locking into place tighter than ever. For example, the signing of the bilateral Critical Minerals Corporation framework at Hyderabad House recently, and again I reported on that. That wasn't just about trade in reality. It was a national security pact between the US and India, designed to pull critical supply chains for advanced technology and defence systems out of Chinese hands and put them into more trusted networks like India. And again, that's a questionable discussion. How reliable is India? We have talked about that a lot. But ultimately, it's the least worst option for the United States when compared to China. It knows it cannot trust China, so the least worst option, certainly regionally, is of course India. So what we're witnessing is not the death of the US-India alliance. It's the evolution, actually, of quite a mature partnership, a very pragmatic partnership. India has made it explicitly clear that it doesn't want to be a junior partner, and it will not accept being a junior partner to Washington. But it also won't join any sort of formal Western military bloc or alliance. What it will try to do, and is certainly following the path, is to keep maintaining its strategic autonomy. It's trying to continue this sort of independence of India. In other words, it's not tying itself either to Beijing or to Washington or indeed to Moscow, although it obviously has those deep historic roots. And it will continue, as it says, to buy its oil from where it wants, Moscow obviously primarily, and it will maintain its diplomatic flexibility, this sort of schizophrenia where one day it's deep friends with China, but the next day it's deep friends with the United States. That is a path it is getting away with. But as I often say, how long can it continue that path? There will come a day, sadly, when it will have to choose sides. But ultimately, and really this sort of leads on to sort of the evolution of this discussion, and when it comes to the hard maths of keeping the Indian Ocean free of Chinese dominance, India and the United States are finding themselves looking at the same chessboard, fearing the same end game, the same checkmate on this chessboard. Washington isn't sidelining India. It can't, it daren't. But it's actually now adjusting to a reality where India is stepping up as an independent, heavily armed superpower in its own right. It's early days, but as I often say, the United States needs India to step up to the plate. It needs it as a regional superpower, but more importantly as an ally, and a reliable ally. And the commissioning of these 3 boats, it's not just a win for India. It sends a very loud signal to Beijing and China, and indeed to Washington, that Delhi, India, intends to rule its own waves. But, and again, there is a but to all this. That, as I say, that is very much the pragmatic reality on the ground. But building sophisticated warships is one thing, but sustaining a stable, unified nation is another. And this is really where all this still rests on quite questionable foundations. Because under this sort of glossy veneer of India, this rising military superpower, is, as I keep reporting, a deeply precarious domestic reality. India's growth story sits on incredibly shaky foundations, and despite all the headline numbers, economists and global inequality trackers are consistently pointing out, as indeed I do from my small desk here in London, that India still remains one of the most unequal economies on earth. The top 1%, for example, actually possess 40% of India's wealth. 1% of India own 40% of the nation's wealth. So when you have a highly questionable, heavily massaged GDP narrative and these fake sort of numbers, the smoke and mirrors tactic that India, particularly the Modi regime, tries to sort of sell to the world, and if you've got a hollowed out middle class, and an extreme regional disparity, these hugely disparate regions across India that compared from wealth to poor, you're not looking at this sort of united monolithic India, this sort of great potential superpower. You're looking at a political structure, an economic and social structure that is on one single trend line, as we often report here. It is heading towards fragmentation. That is an inevitable outcome of the direction of travel at the moment. So if these political cracks eventually do trigger a breakup of India, a systemic fragmentation, the entire security architecture of this region turns on its head. And this is where the West may need, really, and I believe they will be thinking this as well as plan B, but they do need to reevaluate its long-term dependencies in this region. Because, of course, yes, today, as it stands, it needs India, as India stands, as a reliable ally. But it knows, and the analysts back in Washington and across the Five Eyes nations, they all know that India is pretty precarious. It could literally, and I often talk about the catalytic event, it could literally overnight just fall apart like the Soviet Union did. Then what? That is the big question. Then what? Well, of course, as we always conclude, there is only one answer to this, the strategic map. If the subcontinent does indeed fragment, then of course a sovereign khalistan would, or should it successfully establish an economic corridor, as the aspirational boundaries of Khalistan proclaim. If we can achieve these boundaries for Khalistan, where it does create this corridor all the way down to the Arabian Sea, if it swallows up Gujarat, it would instantly alter the balance of power once again, because rather than the West having to rely on a highly erratic, non-aligned and internally volatile present-day India, an independent maritime state like Khalistan would offer instead a direct, highly disciplined and ideologically reliable naval power base right there on the Arabian Sea. It's got everything the West needs, a reliable ally that is socially, politically, ideologically aligned with the democratic West, and will no doubt be part funded by the West, I've no doubt, but it also provides the physical capability, the port structure, the infrastructure to police, navally speaking, the Indian Ocean. Essentially, it does offer the West a stable, predictable, strategically reliable, aligned partner capable of securing critical trade routes and, of course, countering those regional threats without the baggage of Delhi's institutional dysfunction. So the real question for Western players isn't just how to arm the current Indian state, but ultimately, who are their most reliable allies when the current system inevitably cracks? And I have no doubt they will be considering this. There is the situation today and there is the situation tomorrow. That is what the West will be thinking about, I have absolutely no doubt. Now, I want to move on to this story, and I saw this on Facebook, this announcement. I just laughed at the irony of it. Indeed, this is in Canada. And in fact, those of you who also might have seen this post on social media, you might have seen my comment. I did actually make a comment which has proved quite popular. It's quite a predictable comment. When I saw this, I'm going to talk about this story actually now. It was the Indian Consulate General in Toronto. They posted up that they've just started a new community campaign, and they're sharing photos of, you can see the photos here, smiling officials offering friendship to the local community. Loads of Sikhs have been invited there, all very sort of happy and shaking hands, at least on the face of it. And they're talking about unity, mutual respect, all these sort of lovely, standard, harmless, diplomatic niceties. But what made me laugh, and I have to say it was an angry laugh, it's the timing of it. This friendly campaign is actually happened on the anniversary of India's murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So this is the exact same consulate that Western intelligence agencies and police investigators, RCMP, CSIS, have linked to dangerous networks of state-sponsored harassment, violence and murder. And yet those same officials are here trying to act like a gentle, caring neighbour. So, it's the irony, as I said in the intro, the irony of this drips large. This is not a real attempt to build bridges with the community. It's damage control. It's a calculated move to clean up their image after the Nijar murder and try to portray this sort of image of being peaceful, right when the world is actually remembering the dark actions of the Indian state 3 years, the 3-year anniversary as it passed. Now, for years, human rights groups and diaspora communities have warned that India does not use its overseas consulates just for consular business, like passports, visas, those sorts of things. Under the Modi government, this extremist right-wing government in India, this consular infrastructure, these offices, have been turned into tools to watch, surveil, and monitor anyone who dares speak out against India. So whether it's in Canada, the United States, right across the United States, here in the UK, wherever, the machinery of the Indian state, this infrastructure, driven by that political ideology of Hindutva, the RSS, RAW, of course, the NSA, they're actively working this agenda to suppress people overseas, to silence any dissenting voice overseas, to monitor them, to surveil them, and therefore to silence them, and potentially to launch operations against them. And as we've highlighted regularly, they use their diplomatic status in these consulates as a shield. And from these consulates, these buildings, these offices, they map out activist groups, they threaten local business owners, they cancel the visas of families back home in Punjab. And of course, as we saw with Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, they're even quite happy to use violence against citizens on foreign soil. So this new PR campaign, these sort of jolly photos, these smiling photos, it's not about peace, it's a cover story to hide a system of state-sponsored bullying. Nothing more, to hide this campaign of transnational oppression. Anyway, but while Delhi uses its state power to divide and intimidate, there's something a bit more inspiring, a bit more happy going on across the United States. It's very much a grassroots campaign. It's the powerful alternative story really growing in the United States. And again, I touch upon it regularly. It's the Sikh coalition, for example, spearheading once again a coalition of like-minded, aligned parties standing up to what's going on and what's happening in India and what India is trying to do in North America, across the North American continent. So the Sikh coalition recently joined their hands with an organisation called Hindus for Human Rights, and I've talked about them before. But this is alongside the coalition of other faith groups for, actually in this specific case, it's a specific day of action in Jackson Heights. But it's one of many grassroots events that have taken place and taking place to highlight the fact that this coalition of human rights organisations are not going to put up with India's behaviour, and they're going to highlight to the world what India is up to. And again, it's not just some sort of rapidly put together political alliance. It is a real shield against hate and division coming from India. And for years, these two groups, Hindus for Human Rights and Sikh Coalition, have actually worked together and stood together to fight against the rise of Hindutva nationalism and the oppression of minorities, not just Sikhs, but other minorities as well. And they've worked together on several occasions to educate lawmakers and successfully pushed local government, local administrations to, for example, condemn state bullying against caste discrimination, etc. All those sorts of policies, again, that we've talked about regularly. And it does actually bring up an important point on this. And again, it's important that it's Hindus for Human Rights. And again, I mention this every time, or quite often I talk about Hindus for Human Rights. Quite often, well, not quite often, but on a regular basis, we do criticise the Indian government. But we always have to be very careful. I always choose my words very carefully. Because Hindutva is not Hinduism. This is why the existence of Hindus for human rights is actually really important. Because Hindutva is a relatively modern political ideology. You know, it stems back from, well, early 20th century, the RSS, and their sort of origins in the early 20th century. It's basically based on extreme nationalism and the idea that one group should dominate everyone else. It's this sort of superior race theory. This is why they bought into the whole Nazi ideology so easily. It's all about the dominance of a superior race, the sort of Aryan race, or the sort of the Hindu extremist race. And Hinduism, though, Hinduism itself is something very different. It's an ancient, peaceful religion, on the whole, followed by hundreds of millions of people who actually genuinely want nothing to do with this state violence or persecution. They do not agree or align with it in any way. And you've got to understand, though, in the same breath, why Hindutva is so popular. Now, again, I caveat everything I say, as I always do, that I am not anti-Hindu. I actually have had, in the past, many Hindu friends. And I know there is a strong anti-Hindu sentiment in our audience, which is totally understandable, because you guys, and certainly your families and your previous generations, have suffered so deeply at the hands of Hindus. But again, this is why I need to tread very carefully here, because again, I am not anti-Hindu, I am anti-Hindutva. But the problem is, many Hindus are seduced by the Hindutva ideology. So the question is, why is Hindutva so popular? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. If you belong to the majority population in India, the Hindutva message is designed, of course, to be very attractive to you. It promises national pride, a strong global image, feeling of power. It empowers you as a Hindu, which is interesting because that's how it aligns with the Nazi ideology of the 1930s, this nationalist extremism. The ordinary citizen in Germany felt empowered because they spoke for them. And this is what Hindutva does for Hindus. It speaks for Hindus. It feeds, it seduces them into this feeling that they represent Hindus, all Hindus. And it empowers them. So the average Hindu feels empowered by this. And for many, particularly who benefit from the traditional caste system, as long as you're not a Dalit and you're somewhere up in the middle of that caste pyramid, it actually maintains, it keeps their social and economic advantages securely in place. If you maintain your position in that pyramid of the caste system, then why would you break it? Why would you want to break up that system? Because you still benefit. Okay, you're not upper caste, but there's plenty beneath you in that pyramid. So of course, I'm happy to maintain that system. So it's quite easy. It is quite easy to see why people do get swept up in the ideology of Hindutva. It feels like strength. But true strength obviously doesn't require destroying human rights of your neighbours, of those people in your communities. And that is exactly why groups like Hindus for Human Rights are so important. And by standing publicly with the Sikh Coalition, these Hindu advocates are actually sending a very clear message. It's therefore a much more powerful message to Delhi and the world. Their message is not in our name. We are Hindus and we do not agree with what you are doing in the name, allegedly, of Hinduism. So what they're actually demonstrating by this, by existing and then obviously aligning with Sikh Coalition, they're showing that Hinduism is not the problem. The problem is the extremists who've hijacked the faith for their own political agenda. That is what the RSS is about. And so this alliance proves that when minorities are targeted, the best answer is to build an unbreakable bond of solidarity across different faiths, and this is what's happening. So, India's consulates, they're quite happy to use their power to divide, but it's these grassroots alliances and the groups that are joining together are showing what real power is. It's the grassroots power. And that's why I'm always so adamant. I always try and sell this idea that it's grassroots power. Don't think you are one single voice and have no power. Actually, all of our voices combined at grassroots level have enormous power. And it's grassroots united voices that have literally brought down governments throughout history. But I also want to evolve this discussion actually into a talk about extremism, because this story popped up again. Oh dear, this guy Brian Tamaki and his extremist Christians in New Zealand. Our old friend Brian Tamaki. He has this history of targeting minority faiths, and he's a deep right-wing extremist. And unfortunately, these guys are led by this leader of a church called Destiny Church. And I won't even call it a church, it's a cult. Let's call it out for what it is. It's actually a cult. And this guy, Brian Tamaki, has once again been making a lot of highly aggressive, hateful statements online and at rallies. And if you recall, I reported at the beginning of this year how his useful idiots with these ridiculous T-shirts, started attacking the Naga Kirtans in New Zealand. And they were carrying all sorts of signs, shouting Jesus and all that sort of nonsense. And signs saying this is New Zealand, not India. And Tamaki even posted videos calling for New Zealand to be purged of Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, and also visually disrespecting all the flags and symbols. I mean, again, his track record is very well known. I've reported it far too often, actually, unfortunately. But unfortunately, his latest public campaign to try and essentially purge New Zealand of any immigrants of any description, which again, the irony, as I often have to remind everybody, is that Tamaki and all these people, these useful idiots, are all immigrants themselves. They're all immigrants. They're just demanding that other immigrants be purged. In other words, they're Nazis, is really what it boils down to. It's all about superior race. But anyway, I don't need to sort of tell you guys about all that. But anyway, the backlash actually has fortunately been quite swift again. For example, the New Zealand Jewish Council condemned very publicly all his hatred, and other organisations, Islamic, Buddhist, Sikh associations, have all stood together against these attacks. There has been a huge united backlash against this guy. He's really stuck his head above the parapet and he's found his head's being quite royally battered by all these organisations across New Zealand. So well done to you guys. And the Free Speech Union also had to step in. But they said, look, they're defending the right to speak, but they did firmly warn, saying there is a right to free speech, but you cannot just target entire communities like this. Basically, it's hate speech. It is ultimately, it's certainly here in the UK, it'd be a criminal offence. But again, Brian Tamaki, he is a Christian extremist. He's weaponising his religion, his cult, to divide and create an us versus them battle. But again, this is why I actually want to talk about this, because it does raise a much bigger question about language. And it also made me wonder, and I've talked about this in the past, and I've wondered, does Sikhism, for example, have extremists? Because I do know just about every religion in history has its extremists at that extreme end of any religion. Now, does Sikhism, for example, have extremists? Well, if you ask the Indian government, of course, they will say yes. Delhi labels extremists, terrorists, whatever, anybody who supports Khalistan. They are extremists in the definition of the Indian government. And of course, they try and spread that message that Khalistanis are extremists, they are a Sikh extremist. But it's nonsense. Because really, if you look at the real definition of extremism, I want to, for example, compare what's happening in Punjab and across the diaspora about so-called Sikh extremists and compare them to actual religious extremism around the world. And if you look around the world, true religious extremism always follows one simple blueprint. It uses holy texts or divine mandates, whatever, to justify domination, forced conversion, or even massacres, wiping out other people who refuse to convert. Prime example is Islamic extremism. Groups like ISIS, obviously well publicised, their goals are purely theological, meaning they are driven by a strict religious interpretation. They use brute force violence, brutal violence, to erase borders, force people to convert, and murder, kill anyone who doesn't follow their specific religious doctrine. Their target is very clear. It's a global religious state, a caliphate. That is Islamic extremism writ large. I mean, again, it's one of the more obvious ones that we can all identify. But it's not just Islam. We see the same majoritarian pattern in Hindu extremism, Hindutva. Obviously, we talk about this regularly. You've got radical groups like the RSS, the VHP, the Bajrang Dal. They're using faith, the Hindu faith, as, once again, a political weapon. They're actively persecuting minorities, religious minorities, non-Hindus, leading to the destruction of churches, mosques. They do economic boycotts. They actually advocate for violence against Muslims, Christians, and, of course, Sikhs. And their goal is, of course, the Hindu Rashtra. It is this ethnocentric state of Hindus where minority faiths are demoted to, well, at best, second-class status, but ultimately they're aiming for forced conversion. This is part of the reason why they're trying to absorb Sikhism into Hinduism. They want you to become Hindus. So that is Hindu extremism. Again, very well publicised. Christianity, isn't innocent either. Christian extremism, Brian Tamaki is a prime example. But not just Brian Tamaki. You only need to go back through history, because there is this long, bloody history of Christian extremism. Centuries ago, we had the Crusades, colonial movements that used violence, reference yesterday's show actually, to conquer lands and force indigenous populations to convert. And if you didn't convert, they killed them. So for those groups, and okay, we are going, it's historic, it is centuries ago, but still it is Christian extremism, so they have existed. And to a lesser degree, they still exist today. And certainly historically, for those groups, violence was just, they saw it as a holy duty. And of course, even today, far-right Christian identity movements in the West, and there are many, not just Brian Tamaki, there are many across the West, they use religious rhetoric to attack democratic institutions, target minority communities, you name it. Essentially reflecting what Brian Tamaki is doing in New Zealand. And even Buddhism, the one faith that's supposedly associated with absolute peace, Buddhism. Yeah, even Buddhism has its extremist elements, because parts of Buddhism have been hijacked by very dangerous, violent, extremist movements. And, for example, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, hardline nationalist Buddhist monks have used their religious authority to then incite riots, to lead violent campaigns, to carry out ethnic cleansing against minorities like Muslims in the Rohingya, as an example in Myanmar, claiming that they're protecting the purity of their Buddhist lands. Again, the parallels are mirrored right across all these extremist movements. But Sikhism, look at Sikh history and the modern movement for Khalistan. So where, for example, is the theological mandate to conquer others? Where are the calls for forced conversions? Where are the calls to erase other religions or launch a holy war against the world? As I often say, one of the great attractions of Sikhism doesn't exist to forcefully convert, to recruit people into Sikhi. As the Holy Scriptures say, essentially, a Sikh's duty is to make a Christian a better Christian, not convert him or her, to make a Muslim a better Muslim, not convert him or her, etc., etc. It's a very, very different mandate. So in other words, Sikh extremists just do not exist. Sikhism fundamentally rejects the idea of forcing its faith on anyone. And throughout history, Sikh warriors didn't fight to conquer foreign lands or subjugate other peoples. They fought defensive battles. Again, this is the primary foundation of Sikhi and carrying a kirpan. It is a defensive weapon. It is a weapon designed to defend the oppressed from the oppressor. So throughout history, Sikhs always fought defensive battles to protect the weak, to defend human rights, and of course to stop tyrannical rulers from erasing communities. And the struggle for Khalistan is the same. It is not a theological crusade, despite what the critics try to label Khalistani extremism as about. It's not a theological crusade. It is simply a demand for self-determination and regional autonomy. It is a defensive measure to defend the people of that region against the oppression of Delhi. It is the community, whether in Punjab or across the diaspora, who've had to literally flee for their lives. It's saying we have our own distinct identity, our own language, our own historic homeland, so therefore we have the right to govern ourselves safely without state-sponsored violence. In other words, it is a defensive movement. And of course, by placing that extremist label on Sikh activists and Khalistani campaigners, Delhi is deliberately trying to confuse the international community. They want the West to believe that a political movement for human rights and sovereignty is the same thing as this global holy war that all these other religions have been fighting throughout history. But it's not. When you look at the facts, when you define it in the way I've just done, there is no comparison. That comparison completely dissolves. True religious extremism seeks to dominate and destroy others. The Sikh struggle has always been and remains today a fight for survival, protection and freedom. That's the key difference. So I hope that makes it clear. Right, let's quickly move on to Punjab. The engineered decline of Punjab, a subject we sadly talk about too often. Senior political figures inside Punjab have actually obviously sounded all sorts of alarm bells. And Lok Sabha Member of Parliament, Deputy Chief Minister in fact, Sukhjinder Singh Randhawa, publicly came out to warn that Punjab is currently facing a massive crisis on multiple fronts. Yes, he's actually stood up publicly. Now, many people have said it's on not quite so public platforms. And of course, people like myself have been calling out for a long time. But Randhawa has actually stood up in the Lok Sabha and he's called this out. He said, he's pointed out to what is actually happening. And when an establishment politician like this guy, from a mainstream party, his Congress party, admits that the state is on the brink of collapse, then you know things are getting pretty serious. For example, and he does bring up all sorts of examples, but we know of many. I mean, the summer months now, Punjab's power grid apparently is failing. And Randhawa points out that 6 of the state's 10 major thermal power units have shut down completely. That's 60% of the state's power has closed down. Now, that's not just a technical glitch. It's basically stripped 1,400 megawatts, that's a lot, that's all you need to know, off the grid during peak agricultural season. At the same time, the canal systems, the literal lifelines for much of Punjab's farming economy, are literally falling apart through neglect, through lack of maintenance, lack of investment. Gurdaspur, this is an example recently. A 40-foot breach in a canal embankment flooded local homes and fields, destroyed crops, wiping out the livelihood of many, many farmers. This is literally their survival at stake. And on top of that, Randhawa pointed out a frightening breakdown of basic law and order. Daylight shootings, gang violence, taking over all sorts of towns and cities. Jalandhar, Ludhiana, Amritsar, Batala, all reporting out of control breaking down of law and order in the streets. Now, the mainstream media would just say it's just standard political incompetence, bad luck, whatever. It just happens. You know, that's sort of the mainstream media's narrative on this, particularly the Godi media. But of course, there's a much more intentional pattern going on here. It's by design. It is the engineered, as the title says, it is an engineered decline of Punjab as a state. And I've talked about it. Dr. Grail in our podcasts has actually provided reams of evidence to support this idea. It is a deliberate designed agenda. Because the central government in Delhi has systematically treated Punjab not as an equal state, but as an agricultural colony to be exploited, to be drained. And, for example, during the Green Revolution, Delhi needed Punjab to feed the entire country of India. They pushed Punjab's farmers into this heavy cycle of wheat and rice production, but doing so, intensive production, knowing it would destroy the local ecosystem. As a result, Punjab's groundwater is nearly gone. The soil is deeply poisoned by toxic fertilisers. The rivers, which I've reported on again, are so badly polluted that Punjab has become the cancer capital of India. All because it's being exploited and destroyed by Delhi and their deliberate agenda. And what does Punjab get in return? Nothing. Delhi has systematically diverted its natural river waters, despite its riparian rights to its own water. So Punjab doesn't even get the benefit of its own rivers, the 5 rivers state. It's Rajasthan, Haryana benefit from it. The central government takes Punjab's water, it takes its grain at artificially low prices, pushing farmers out of business, referred to yesterday's story about that. It refuses to give back the funds, the necessary funds, to maintain the basic infrastructure like the canals or the power plants. And worse, it's been starved of investment, particularly industrial investment. Now, they've set up tax-free zones in neighbouring states, particularly like Gujarat, Modi's own home state, of course. They've benefited from vast amounts of tax-free zones, investments, industrial investments, but not Punjab. And it's a calculated economic strangulation. It's left an entire generation of highly educated, intelligent young Sikhs with no jobs, no industry, no future. That's why they're all selling up and leaving. Again, refer to yesterday's story. And it's a deliberate vacuum that's now being filled, of course, by this epidemic of drugs. Cheap drugs flowing unchecked across the border, again, by design. Designed to destroy a young generation of Sikhs, whilst the police look the other way. And if you try and stand up against the drug culture, you find yourself arrested and tortured, like many. This is the reality of Punjab. And this is why the argument for khalistan isn't just a romantic dream. It becomes a necessary goal. It's a matter of basic survival. When your water's stolen, when your agriculture is deliberately destroyed, when your river systems or your heating systems or your electricity systems are deliberately destroyed, there can only be one answer. You need control over your own resources. And that can only come from an independent, autonomous khalistan. So when people like Randhawa call it out, again, it's just calling out the inevitable. There is only one direction of travel that we're going in with this. India is going to fragment and khalistan is going to appear, because you cannot keep going like this and get away with it forever. Because the world has a habit of, if you don't settle problems, the world will settle them for you. Events, nature, whatever you want to call it, the universe has an amazing way of settling these things. And unfortunately for Delhi, there's only one realistic outcome for all this, and we know what that is. That is, of course, the establishment of khalistan. Right, so let's move on to our comments. We've only got I've got 12 minutes left to go through our comments. So thank you, as always, to you guys for all your comments. Thank you very much. Now, Hardal Singh, yes, indeed. I put your comment first for a very deliberate reason, because I knew I'd forget, which I did yesterday. My apologies. But as you rightly say, can you please remove the Satluj logo? It's really irritating. You can't read the comments. Sorry, look. Press of a button. There you go, Hardal. I hope that makes you less irritated, and I hope you can read the comments now. So my apologies to all you guys. I will probably forget in the future. If I do, again, I apologise in advance. Obviously got to keep it up for our videos, because in the past people have taken our videos and used them for their own benefit on TikTok or whatever. So we have to keep a logo there, just so if people steal it, then viewers know it's Satluj TV. That's the main reason why. So anyway, but you do continue to say Keir Steamer. I don't know if that was a deliberate spelling mistake, but it's a very fortuitous one. It made me laugh. Keir Steamer is gone. He officially tendered his resignation. Indeed, after yesterday's show, in fact, I did say, as I recorded yesterday's show, I said, as of that moment, 6 o'clock yesterday morning, yes, he was still the Prime Minister, but I did predict in a few hours it was likely that he might not be. And indeed, a few hours later, he did stand up in a tearful farewell, tender his resignation. And I have to say, to massive cheers around the United Kingdom. He was not a very popular Prime Minister, and I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of British people actually celebrated. You could almost feel the ground shake as people jumped up and down, like when they score a goal in football. You could almost feel the United Kingdom vibrating as people cheered and jumped up and down on the spot in celebration. Anyway, if you're a Starmer fan, my apologies. No, I don't apologise. The man is a deeply incompetent Prime Minister who's betrayed everybody, including the Sikh community, over and over again. So I don't apologise, actually. Good riddance is what I say. Stay safe. Sikhs are no longer just victims. And Stay Safe's message is you've got to stop apologising. If you keep apologising, then, essentially you're labelling yourself as a victim. I think this is to paraphrase what Stay Safe was trying to say here. If you keep apologising, it means you've done something wrong. So stop apologising. Stand up for yourself. The Sikh community needs to, well, I don't need to preach to you guys. You do it all the time. But the message from Stay Safe is, look, we've got to stop apologising. After the Novak killing, for example, the Sikh community is very much on the back foot. And it has had to go out and build bridges. But don't apologise. Now, you have to be careful here, because actually one thing I have noticed, and this worries me, I've seen an increasing number of videos generated by Sikhs across social media that are quite understandably angry. And they are pushing back against the targeting of the community by particularly the right-wing racists. And so they're pushing back in quite an aggressive manner. Now, what I would say, and again refer to yesterday's show, just be careful. Don't fall into this trap of dividing. Yes, absolutely, the Sikh community needs to stand up and defend itself. It must indeed point out misinformation, call out the racists, call out the hate crimes, all those sorts of things. But if you start then going on the counter-attack, as I've seen a lot of these videos now, attacking white people, almost goading them, saying, come on then, if you think you're hard enough, well, fine. That's testosterone speaking. Unfortunately, testosterone doesn't always actually bring the best answer to an argument, because ultimately, all you're doing is, again, you're falling into a trap of provocation, division, polarisation. What we're trying to fight in this whole post-Novak situation is trying to stop the divisions growing, because post-Novak, those divisions have become large. Many in the white community now blame the Sikh community for this murder, unjustifiably so. And likewise, many in the Sikh community saying, right, fine, if you want to attack us, we'll attack you. Again, the division's growing. So it's all about building bridges. So there is a fine line here to tread for the Sikh community. It's an unenviable position for you guys, and I do feel sorry for you. I feel for you. Because, of course, you are attacked on a daily basis. But unfortunately, and the Bible phrase is you have to turn the other cheek. The Christian teaching is turn the other cheek. It's very hard to do so when you're attacked. However, that is usually the best way of playing it, is forgive, educate. I know it's hard if you're a testosterone-fueled Sikh with centuries of genetic heritage designed for you to wield your kirpan, shouting "Bole so hell." I totally empathise with that. But all that does, certainly in the present climate, is just generate more hate and division. So we've got to be a bit more diplomatic about this. This is where Sikh diplomacy comes in. Spread the peace and love. Easier said than done. I appreciate that. Anyway, thank you, Stay Safe, for that philosophical discussion. Max Force. Oh, look, yes, talking about resignations. I've also noticed across social media the anti-Carney brigade are really picking up the pace. And Max Force wades in likewise. He's a clown. He should resign. He's a pathetic, spineless leader. Indeed, I'm no fan of Carney. Regular viewers of the show know my feelings about Mark Carney. He's a World Economic Forum advocate. He is a globalist. He was parachuted in to this position, heading Canada, out of nowhere. He was a former Bank of England governor. He was in charge of our Bank of England for several years. Why? Again, because the globalist elite, and you don't even need to be a conspiracy theorist to know this is true, the globalist elite, who also seem to revolve around the World Economic Forum, are putting their placemen and women into positions of power. Macron, Starmer was one. What was her name? Ahern in Jacinda, what's her name, in New Zealand. She was another one. All these world leaders, certainly at one time, were all alumni of the World Economic Forum. Carney is another one. They're all running their own agenda, and it's not your agenda. It's not in your interest. It's not in my interest. It's not in the interests of all our ordinary lives. It's in their interests. So, yeah, anyway, that was just a bit of a sideline, just talk about Carney. But yeah, Max Force, I think you're rather aligned with that thing. Their group, whatever you want to call them, the World Economic Forum is just one label for this group. And who knows who the real dark shadows are, the real puppet masters behind the scenes. You can pick your theory of choice, but just almost by definition, nobody knows really who they are. But they are the ones ruining millions of lives. They are the ones pushing the digital ID, these oppressive, authoritarian controls over all our societies. And we need to unite to fight back against it. Critics Corner returned. As I said yesterday, the podcast I did with Dr. Growl, for some reason, really managed to break through into the Hindutva lobby. They obviously discovered the video and thought, right, and in they waded. And we had this person, ASB, whatever. I don't know if he's a Hindu. He could be a white guy. I don't know. But basically, he or she, I guess it's a he probably, waded in with quite a nasty anti-Sikh comment. Again, post-Novak, claiming that Digva, the murderer, was a Nihang Sikh. I actually don't think he was. I've not looked into it in great detail, frankly, because I just don't even want to know anymore now. The world's moved on. We need to move on from this and disassociate the community with Vikram Digwa. I don't believe he was a Nihang Sikh, and I am pretty confident that the Nihangs of this world would obviously equally like to disassociate themselves with Digwa. Don't know. But anyway, then this person goes on about, well, basically, it's a real crack at the Sikh community, claiming the Sikh community is also involved in grooming gangs. Yes, there was a Sikh, apparently, in a grooming gang. Well, again, even I think that is possibly true. All I would say is, likewise, you cannot label a whole community by one or two bad eggs in a basket. Just one or two bad criminals. They exist in all our societies. It's like, in fact, I use this in an argument with a right-wing idiot on social media who's having a go at the Sikh community. I said, you labelling the whole Sikh community by Digva is like me labelling all the white people by a guy called Jimmy Savile. And for those of you outside the UK, Jimmy Savile was a white guy who did a load of charitable works, very, very famous celebrity, turned out to be one of the worst paedophiles in British history. So it's like me labelling all white people, well, you're all Jimmy Saviles, aren't you? That's the equivalent. Anyway, I'm not going to give you more airtime, ASB, but a thank you, but a silly comment, really, and totally unsupportable. Super Giant Slayer. And I picked up this one because I thought, okay, right, here we go. Here's an armchair warrior, a typical keyboard warrior. Bindranvali was hiding in the big iron cooking pot during, I guess, Blue Star. He soiled himself, etc., etc. And then it just becomes quite offensive. And as I said, this is just a comment from an armchair warrior, a keyboard warrior. What actually have you ever done, Super Giant Slayer, in your life to defend and stand up for your principles, apart from writing a few pretty offensive comments on social media? You're talking about a guy who actually sits over my shoulder, who laid out the ultimate sacrifice. He stood against over 1,000 Indian troops and a line of tanks with his mates to defend his principles, and he gave his life for that. I don't know if he soiled himself or not. In fact, I strongly doubt he did. That's just a pretty insulting thing to say. All I know is that he stood for several days against the Indian army in one of the most heroic stands I've actually read about in the 20th century, and he died for his principles. So, yeah, it's very easy for you from your keyboard, wherever you are in the world, to make a silly comment like this and insult a guy who actually now is revered by millions of people around the world for his principles and heroism. I think speaks more about you and your lack of abilities or achievements or even principles. It's very sad when I read a comment like this, because I think you actually have no idea, have you, of all. And it's not just Bindranvaliji, it's other shaheeds, it's other people of all causes who have given their lives, made the ultimate sacrifice for their very principles. They don't sit on social media making silly comments. They got off their backsides and they literally fought with their lives to defend their principles and, of course, human rights. So TC actually, this TC's comment appears here because TC actually says it really in a much more elaborate, a much more articulate way than I can. It is a sad time for us. Parnam, respect for our brave, courageous shaheeds. It's important to acknowledge that the fight for human rights can result in the loss of a fundamental human right in its own right, human life. Bhindranwale Ji and others gave their lives for their principles and human rights. So thank you, TC. I put that comment deliberately there, essentially, as somebody from the community answering Supergiant Slayer's silly comment. Quick one on the shorts. Oh yes, thank you, KTEFPV. This was a link to a story. I don't have time to talk much about it, but ultimately it's about yoga in a Gurdwara in Faridkot. And the people providing the yoga were politely asked to move on. So Gurdwaras are not the place for leisure pursuits like yoga. It is a place for reflection, for worship, Gurbani, etc., etc. So thank you for that link. So if you want to watch that video, just follow that link, everybody, on one of the shorts. My Google. Oh yeah, this is a nice comment. Thank you for this. Thank you for your dedicated support for Sikhs and Sikhi. I am your star. No, I'm not. I am just but a servant. I am a servant for the cause, no more. There are much better servants than I, one of which obviously looking over my shoulder. But yeah, you thank me from the bottom of my heart. Well, I thank you for your comment, but also more importantly, I think it's you guys that matter much more than I do. I am but a messenger carrying a message of your community, your religion, your spirit, your everything. That's the key. That's the power, and that is what the world needs to thank. Stay safe. Yeah, we did talk about football. FIFA, Khalistan national football. Yes, indeed. Maybe in 4 years' time, the next FIFA World Cup, we might have a Khalistan football team. I don't know how well it will do. Sadly, our one Sikh who played for New Zealand the other night, I think they lost the other night. Sad to report, but anyway. But yeah, give it 4 years, a few years, and we will have our own football team. And I'm sure they'll do pretty well. And the final set, as we're out of time now, Jaspir. Oh, yeah, it was the march of the Sikh princesses, Jaspir Kaur and I need to look. Oh, Kamaljit Kaur. I had to translate it because it's in Punjabi. Kamaljit Kaur and Jaspir Kaur. Thank you for your lovely comments. We had cross Kirpans and Satsri Akals, and lots of Satsri Akals filled up the comments from Murgi Vlogs Raja and Sukha Singh, one of our regulars. And the final sign off for the day goes to Sukwinder Graywell, Vaheguruji, Satsri Akal. And Gurmeet Singh, Khalistan will be there very soon. Khalistan's in bed. I don't know how soon. I'm just going to pop that up again for you there. I don't know how soon it will be. All I do know is it is coming. Almost by definition, it is unpredictable. It is unforeseeable when or even how. But we do know the line of travel, and that line of travel, like a beam of light, cannot be stopped by anything in its way. It will continue on one single straight line with an inevitable end. And that end is, of course, the establishment of Khalistan. Delighted to report. Anyway, must draw things to a close. Thanks for watching. Do send me your thoughts. Send me your links to stories I need to know about. Anything that you think I need to research or pass on. Send me a message at message@sutlejtv.com, or you can, of course, drop a comment in the comments below. Please do that. Much appreciated. But that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, everybody. God willing, I will catch you guys tomorrow.